Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today, well, we're tackling a story that, frankly, just rewrites the playbook on power shifts in Africa. The sudden, really unexpected fall of Paul Biya. I mean, the man ruled Cameroon for nearly 50 years.
Half a century. Almost unbelievable.
Exactly. And we've really dug into the sources you shared. We've got reports, deep analysis, but also these quieter firsthand accounts from, inside the palace, out on the streets.
We're a mix.
Yeah. So our mission today is to pull out the most significant threads. How did his isolation connect to this, surgical precision of his fall? And what does it all mean for Cameroon, obviously, but also the wider continent?
Because it wasn't loud, was it? It was this quiet moment.
That just shattered everything. Decades of silence, gone.
And that specific moment, it arrived with almost startling precision.
Yeah.
Just before sunrise, 5:43 a.m., the sources pinpoint.
On the national broadcaster, CRTV.
Right, and what's striking, what the sources emphasize, is the complete lack of preamble. No anthem, no grand ceremony.
Yeah.
Just a military spokesperson. Steps forward, apparently looking quite nervous, trembling even, reading from just one sheet of paper.
And those words, they're the ones that just changed everything, weren't they?
Stark, so direct. The President of the Republic, Paul Biya, is no longer in command. Just like that.
Wow.
The armed forces have taken control in the name of national survival. Cameroonian sovereignty begins now.
And then, nothing, just silence.
Exactly. The signal cuts. Black screen. And you can imagine, across the country, this collective holding of breath. Was it real?
Could Biya, the permanent fixture, actually be gone?
That was the immediate question. The sources capture it, the uncertainty, the whispers spreading like wildfire. Is it true? Is he dead? Who's actually in charge now?
But then, as the sun starts coming up over Yongay, things start to become clearer, more tangible.
Right. Reality starts to set in. Reports trickle in, then flood in. Armored vehicles suddenly appearing around the Atudi Palace.
The presidential palace.
Yeah. Black SUVs speeding towards the Ministry of Defense. Airport traffic just stopped. Grounded.
And the old guard. The key generals loyal to Biya.
Vanished. Nowhere to be seen, according to the reports. That was crucial.
But what about the people? You'd maybe expect fear, people hiding.
That's what makes the account so compelling. It wasn't fear. The sources describe people flooding the streets, but not in terror. It was tears, laughter, this kind of shaky, disbelieving hope.
Incredible. Give us some of those specific scenes from the sources.
Okay, so in Douala, you have crowds gathering, almost spontaneously, watching replays of that short announcement on their phones and their faces, reportedly like they were watching a dream they couldn't quite believe.
Wow.
In Bamenda, deep in the Anglophone region, church bells just start ringing. Nobody told them to. They just started.
Spontaneous.
Totally. School children chanting, this was in Bafoussam. 50 years we were not born, now we walk free. Just kids making sense of it.
That's powerful.
And older people.
Yeah.
Men openly weeping on their doorsteps. Women literally dropping to their knees in the middle of the street to pray.
Like waking up.
Exactly the phrase used in several reports. Like waking up from a half-century coma. They called it a quiet coup, yes, but for the people on the ground, a loud miracle.
And you mentioned this wasn't just a local story. It went global, fast.
Oh, immediately. As the news got out, the questions started bouncing around diplomatic circles, newsrooms, everywhere, really. If Paul Biya can fall, who's next?
Okay, let's get into that. Because the announcement felt sudden, like a lightning strike. But the sources, they're very clear, this didn't just happen overnight.
No, not at all. This was months, maybe longer, in the planning, all happening completely under the radar.
And the really critical piece, the sources say, is who's behind it. It wasn't rebels in the forest. It wasn't some foreign plot.
No, it was by his own generals, men who served him for decades, part of the very fabric of his regime, men who, the report suggests, just finally had enough.
That's a staggering betrayal. Was there a central figure in this military shift?
The sources highlight Brigadier General Anno Ambassi. And what's really remarkable is his position, head of internal military logistics.
Logistics.
Yeah, but crucially, he was the guy Biya had personally trusted, especially over the last year, to manage his own presidential security detail.
So the man tasked with protecting Biya
Was instrumental in planning his removal. Precisely.
What pushed them? Was there a specific breaking point the sources identify?
There seems to have been a real breaking point, and it's maybe not what you'd first think. It was Biya's extended hospitalization in Geneva, months long, and apparently under French surveillance the whole time.
And the contrast, him in a Swiss hospital, the situation back home.
Devastatingly stark. The reports really hammer this home. You have Biya allegedly racking up medical bills over, what, $1.4 million in just 3 months?
In Switzerland.
While back in Cameroon, ordinary people are facing crippling food inflation, the brutal ongoing separatist conflict, massive youth unemployment.
It's just disconnected.
Completely.
Yeah.
And there's this one quote from an officer captured in the sources that just says it all. "We are guarding a ghost."
We are guarding a ghost. Wow. That speaks volumes about his detachment, doesn't it?
It really does. The sources suggest that for most of 2024, Biya hadn't even set foot inside a government building. Decisions weren't coming from him directly, but from this tiny, insulated, closed circle.
Who was in it?
Old allies, relatives, some French consultants, all completely removed from the daily reality of Cameroon. And you have to remember the demographics here.
Right, the youth bulge.
Exactly. 80% of the country is under 35. They've literally never known another leader. Yet they were totally shut out of power, shut out of the conversation.
So while Biya and his circle were isolated, something else was building within the military itself, a different loyalty.
That's the picture the reports paint. A fundamental shift. Younger officers, people whose loyalty was primarily to Cameroon, to its future, not just to the old man and his fading regime.
And they started organizing.
Quietly, carefully, building networks, unit by unit, winning hearts and minds, as they say, persuading colleagues that change was necessary and possible.
This must have required incredible coordination for the actual event.
The precision is really something. Sources mention specific examples, like one colonel quietly securing the loyalty of the absolutely vital 3rd Armored Division.
Crucial.
Another coordinating blackout drills with Air Force pilots, seemingly routine but actually practice. And maybe the most critical piece, the internal flip within the Presidential Guard.
The soldiers right there in the palace.
They reportedly switched sides, silently, without a single shot being fired.
That level of discipline is, well, it sounds like a perfectly executed military operation, but aimed internally.
It really does. The timeline laid out in the sources is almost, cinematic. The final go order apparently came at 3:17 a.m.
How?
A single encrypted text message. Laredo Tom. Strange code name.
Okay.
By 4 a.m., Biya's personal communications team neutralized, detained. By 5 a.m., state broadcaster CRTV secured. And then, 5:43 a.m., the announcement.
And all of this, as the sources keep repeating, no blood, no chaos, just surgical precision.
That phrase comes up again and again, power changing hands with discipline.
Okay, let's dig even deeper into that betrayal angle. Because the sources really emphasize it wasn't just generals far removed. It came from inside his own palace, from people who, as one source put it, had eaten at his table.
Right, and this is where the story becomes intensely personal, almost Shakespearean. At the absolute heart of this inner betrayal, according to multiple accounts, was Sergeant Didier Ickel.
A bodyguard.
Yes, a quiet, seemingly unremarkable bodyguard. Served just outside Biya's private suite for over a decade. Almost invisible, part of the furniture.
But he had a history, didn't he? The sources mention his family.
Absolutely critical to understanding his motivation. This wasn't just about politics for him. His father, jailed years ago for criticizing the regime. His uncle died during the crackdowns in the Anglophone crisis.
Oh, wow.
And his younger brother, shot dead during a protest in Douala. So to Biya, Eckel was just a silent uniform. But inside that uniform, decades of personal grief, simmering anger, all directed at the man he guarded.
And that made him invaluable to the plotters.
Completely. He had the access, the proximity, the knowledge nobody else did. The sources detail how Eckel meticulously mapped the palace guard shifts. Who was on duty when.
He knew who might turn.
Exactly. He identified sympathetic guards, those who could be persuaded to defect. And then, in those crucial pre-dawn hours, 3:04 a.m., the reports say, it was Sergeant Eckel who silently opened the back gates.
Letting the special forces team in.
Without a sound. He never fired a weapon, didn't have to, but as one source powerfully put it, his fingerprints were on the fall of a king.
Incredible. And he wasn't alone in feeding information out?
No, far from it. It seems the regime was hemorrhaging secrets from the inside. Sources mention generals, men who previously enforced Biya's rule, now discreetly passing encrypted USB drives full of intel to the planners.
What kind of intel?
Troop movements, loyalist lists, and even cabinet secretaries leaking memos, confidential stuff. Details about billions being siphoned off into hidden French bank accounts. And maybe most damningly, Biya's own personal physician reportedly handed over medical files. Confidential records proving, the sources claim, that the president had been clinically unfit to govern for over 18 months.
So it really wasn't just a military coup in the traditional sense. It was the whole system collapsing inwards because people had just had enough.
That's the feeling you get. There's a quote from an insider that captures it perfectly. "We weren't plotting a coup. We were correcting a national coma."
A national coma.
Yeah. So by the time the military made its move, there was essentially no one left willing or perhaps able to defend Biya. No loyalist counterstrike, no resistance, just this isolated old man.
Described as too old to flee, too isolated to fight.
And too late to understand that even silence can betray. A powerful summary from one analysis.
And that heartbreaking detail, the whisper from the junior officer as Maya was led away.
Yes, such a poignant moment captured in the reports. As Biya, the man who ruled for half a century, was being escorted out, this young officer apparently just whispered, loud enough to be heard nearby, "We protected you for 50 years. You forgot to protect us for even one."
Devastating. So the moment the news finally broke, officially on CRTV,
Yeah.
you said the streets just exploded. Talk more about that release, that raw emotion.
It was just immense, visceral. The sources described the first audible reaction in Yaoundé's main market, Mocho Market. Someone just screamed, "He's gone!" And that was like lighting a fuse.
And then
The streets just erupted, thousands pouring out, running, some barefoot, waving makeshift flags, crying, praying, shouting, old men scrambling onto rooftops, waving anything they could find, kids finding empty cans, beating them like drums. Pure, raw, spontaneous release.
mothers weeping in the street.
Yes, women who had lost children, lost husbands under the regime, reportedly just overcome, collapsing in prayer right there on the pavement.
It sounds like a physical weightlifting.
Exactly. In Douala, it wasn't organized marches. It was spontaneous parades that just shut the city down. Motorcycle convoys, flags everywhere, and many flown deliberately upside down.
As a symbol.
A symbol of rebirth, they said. In Bamenda, which has suffered so much, there was this initial stunned silence. You could almost hear the collective processing. And then just an eruption of clapping, shouting, "He's gone! He's finally gone!"
And the youth? The students?
In Buea, students were seen tearing down the ubiquitous portraits of Biya, ripping them down and putting up handmade posters with this defiant message. You can kill a protest, but you can't stop a generation.
Wow, even the elderly.
Yeah, the reports mention older people just watching, stunned, many openly crying, saying things like, "I thought I would die before this day," just disbelief mixed with overwhelming relief.
And crucially, this time, unlike so many protests or moments of dissent in the past, no crackdown.
That's a key point emphasized in the sources. No riot police charging, no water cannons, no soldiers aiming rifles. The army, having orchestrated the change, basically just stood back. They watched and let it happen.
There was a sense of history being made right there on the streets.
Palpable. A viral video captured a young woman shouting into her phone, just ecstatic. This isn't just the fall of Biya, this is the rise of Cameroon. The reports say the streets weren't just filled with people anymore, they were filled with history.
And it culminated that night.
With fireworks over Yaoundé. But not an official organized display, just spontaneous bursts of light and sound, described as chaotic, alive, the sound, perhaps, of a nation breathing freely for the first time in 50 years.
Okay, let's zoom out again, because Biya's fall, huge as it was for Cameroon, sent immediate shockwaves internationally, especially, the sources say, to Paris.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The sources talk about a specific red phone call, though maybe not literally red, to the Élysée Palace in Paris, 6:12 a.m. Paris time.
What was the message?
It's short and brutal. A voice from Yaoundé simply said, "It's done. Biya is no longer in power."
And the reaction in Paris?
Deafening silence, apparently, followed very quickly by barely concealed panic.
Why such a shock? Why was this a geopolitical earthquake for Macron's government?
Because Paul Biya wasn't just any leader, he was France's anchor, their most loyal, most enduring post-colonial ally in Central Africa for decades.
How so? What did he provide?
Access. Unfettered access, the sources stress. For French corporations, think Total, Bolloré, Orange access to Cameroon's resources, lucrative infrastructure deals often awarded without contest.
And militarily?
He allowed French troops, French intelligence services to operate pretty much freely within Cameroon. Unbothered, unseen, as one report put it, Cameroon was a quiet but absolutely critical linchpin for French influence in the entire region.
So losing Biya wasn't just losing an ally, it was losing a strategic foothold.
Absolutely. The sources quote someone from Macron's inner circle admitting it starkly. "We just lost our last wall in Central Africa."
Yeah.
A devastating admission.
Publicly, though, France played it cool, didn't they?
Very cool. Very tight-lipped official statement. You know the drill. monitoring the situation, calling for peace and constitutional order. Standard diplomatic language.
But behind the scenes,
Pure panic, according to sources within the defense ministry. Urgent reports were apparently flying. AES leaders, the Sahel states, were already reaching out to the new military council in Yaoundé.
the anti-French bloc.
Exactly. Russian diplomatic traffic to Cameroon reportedly doubled overnight. Social media across West Africa was overwhelmingly supportive of the change. France's image as the indispensable partner was just crumbling in real time.
This must have triggered serious strategic alarm bells in Paris.
Extremely serious. There's a quote attributed to a military advisor during a closed-door briefing, basically shouting, "If Cameroon joins the AES or kicks out our bases, we lose the entire Gulf of Guinea." Strategically vital.
And the economic fallout.
Immediate jitters. Total Energy stockholders were reportedly demanding emergency meetings. Billions of euros worth of French investments and deals suddenly looked like they could be on the edge of nationalization.
So France's fear wasn't just about Biya himself, but the president, the domino effect.
That was the real terror, the sources suggest. If Biya, the ultimate survivor, the cornerstone of France-Afrique, could be toppled by his own military, what did that signal for other long-standing French allies? Leaders in Togo, Congo, Brazzaville, Chad, they must have been watching nervously.
And Macron hesitated to even engage with the new leadership.
Reportedly, yes. There was a sense of shock, of betrayal. Sources suggest the feeling in the Élysée was there's no face left to trust in Yaoundé from their perspective. Who do you even call?
Meanwhile, a completely different message was emerging from young Africans across the continent.
Yeah, a powerful counter-narrative, defiance and hope. The sentiment was, we don't want France's fear, we want our future. Sources describe these small, symbolic gatherings, even in Paris itself. Young Africans waving the Cameroonian flag, singing "La vie est off."
Which means?
Roughly, the old one has fallen, Africa is rising. A potent message.
Just 2 days after the fall, another major event unfolded: the opening of the Etude Palace. Not for tourists, though.
No, definitely not. Investigators and auditors walked through those gates. The sources describe it vividly. They weren't just opening doors, they were opening the palace to history.
And what they found inside.
Reportedly, worse than imagined. The consensus across the reports is that Biya hadn't really governed a country in the traditional sense. He had managed a vault.
A vault. What does that mean? What was inside?
Okay, picture this. 3 entire floors, sources say, filled with sealed cabinets, encrypted hard drives, hidden behind soundproof doors, biometric locks. And inside, handwritten letters from French and European officials, contracts that had never seen the light of day, never went through Parliament.
Specific examples.
Oh yeah, oil licenses sold to French companies for, get this, 1% royalties. Timber concessions granted with literally 0 environmental protections. Secret security agreements allowing foreign powers to set up surveillance bases on Cameroonian soil without public knowledge.
It's staggering. And the money trail, the finances.
Equally damning, according to the reports. They apparently found details of a secret offshore bank account in Geneva, credited monthly directly from the Bolloré Group, the French logistics giant, explicitly for monopoly rights over Cameroon's ports.
A direct quid pro quo.
Seems like it. And another trail showing how millions in international development aid, money meant for schools, for hospitals, had been systematically rerouted.
To where?
To luxury real estate firms in Paris, all reportedly linked back to relatives and cronies within Biya's inner circle.
And the sources mention a specific letter from Biya himself to the French president.
Yes, reportedly dated 2021, found in these archives. And the quote is just chillingly blunt. Biya apparently wrote, "As long as I live, Cameroon's loyalty to France is guaranteed. My generals are well managed. My people are contained. Just keep the funds moving and silence the critics."
Wow. Just keep the funds moving. That letter plus everything else found in the archives. It must have hit the new leadership hard.
They were reportedly stunned, blown away, because these documents weren't just rumors or allegations anymore. This was cold, hard proof. Proof that Biya hadn't just ruled for 40-plus years. He had systematically sold Cameroon piece by piece to remain on the throne.
And they released some of this information.
Quickly. Redacted, obviously, to protect ongoing investigations, but they released summaries, key documents. And the public reaction? Disbelief, then anger.
Understand.
Young people gathered on university steps, holding signs that just cut through it all. We owe France nothing. Our resources, our rules. Never again.
So Biya's fall wasn't just the end of his rule.
It became the beginning of a national reckoning, enabled by opening that vault. And as the world watched this unfold, that question started to resonate far beyond Cameroon.
Yeah.
If this is what Biya hid, what are the others still hiding?
Let's shift to the rest of Africa's reaction, or in some cases, the lack of reaction. The regional bodies, like ECOWAS,
Right.
how did they respond?
It's fascinating. ECOWAS, often presents itself as the guardian of democracy, stability, regional order.
Right.
But in the hours and days immediately after Biya fell, silence. Deafening silence, the sources say. No emergency summit called, no condemnation, not even an initial press release from Abuja or Accra. Just nothing.
Why? What was going on behind the scenes?
The report suggests paralysis. Internal divisions, yes, but mostly fear. Nigeria, the big player, was apparently urging caution. Senegal was worried about appearing to endorse any military takeover, given their own history. Ghana stayed neutral.
So afraid of endorsing a coup, but also afraid of looking irrelevant.
Exactly. Afraid of looking weak, ineffectual. As one source put it, quite bluntly, ECOWAS protects presidents, not citizens. Its mechanism seems designed for a different era.
While the old guard regional bloc was silent, a different group spoke up.
Immediately and boldly. The AES, the Alliance of Sahel States, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger. Within 24 hours, a joint statement came out of Ouagadougou.
What did it say?
It explicitly saluted the courage of a nation that has reclaimed its sovereignty without foreign permission. A direct challenge to the old order and to France.
This really solidifies that new axis people have been talking about, doesn't it?
That's exactly how the sources frame it. Mali, Burkina, Niger, and now potentially Cameroon. An alliance built not on Western models, but on what they call raw sovereignty, and they acted fast.
How so?
Within days, AES envoys were landing in Yaoundé, meeting with the Transitional Council, signing a memorandum of cooperation, military, economic, even digital security. Real, tangible partnership.
And Captain Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso's leader, had a message.
A powerful one, reportedly broadcast widely. "You have broken your chains," he told Cameroonians. "Now let us build an Africa that no longer kneels." And that sentiment echoed across the Sahel. One falls, four rise. Africa is no longer waiting.
Meanwhile, the ECOWAS eventually put out a statement.
Yeah. On day 5, a short, kind of awkward statement saying they were observing, calling for constitutional restoration. Standard stuff, but it felt late. Toothless.
Too little, too late.
By then, the reports note, the narrative had shifted. The continent had moved on. History was being made elsewhere. Cameroon, the longtime sleeping giant, seemed to have decisively thrown its lot in with the new order.
And reflecting that new order, the leadership unveiled in Cameroon looked radically different.
Radically. When the transitional government was announced on national TV, the sources described the reaction as thunderous applause.
Why such enthusiasm?
Because it wasn't just a cosmetic change. The sources really emphasized this. No gray-haired ministers recycled from the Biya regime. Yeah. No recycled politicians with those hidden French business ties. And crucially, no hint of a hidden hand from Paris pulling the strings.
So genuinely a new generation taking charge.
Absolutely. Look at the makeup. The youngest council member, a 28-year-old civil engineer, now a deputy minister, the new head of education, a 33-year-old teacher, a former protest leader who'd actually been jailed by Biya's regime.
Wow.
The acting spokesperson, a 31-year-old woman, fluent in multiple local languages, already known for her viral speeches on youth empowerment. They actually looked like the people they were supposed to represent.
And that resonated.
Hugely. For the first time in decades, the sources note when the government spoke, the people listened. Their message was clear. We weren't chosen by the West. We're not beholden to the old political families. We're not here to manage the decay anymore.
What was their goal then?
To rebuild Cameroon from the ground up. That was the promise.
And did that message translate into tangible change quickly? Did hope take physical form, as some sources described it?
It seems like it did, almost immediately. Small things, but significant. Hospitals that notoriously demanded bribes for everything, suddenly opening their doors, treating people based on need, reports say.
Teachers went back to work.
Yes, teachers returned to classrooms in regions where they'd been striking or fearful, reportedly reassured they'd actually get paid. And local radio stations, suddenly alive with diverse voices, poets, activists, traditional leaders, speaking openly without the old censorship.
What about the diaspora, those who had left?
A huge reaction there, too. Many Cameroonians abroad, people who felt silenced or even ashamed under Biya, started booking flights home. Intellectuals, activists exiled in Paris, Brussels, Toronto, were reportedly packing their bags.
What were they saying?
Things like, "We didn't leave Cameroon. We left Biya's version of it. Now it's time to return." A real sense of reclaiming their country.
Of course, the old guard wasn't just going to disappear quietly.
No, the old political elites, their power base shattered, their patronage networks exposed. They were cornered, afraid, whispering about restoring stability, hitting at sabotage. Some reportedly fled the country, many heading straight to France.
But the momentum was elsewhere.
Completely. Yeah. The sources say the new Cameroon wasn't listening to ghosts. It was this feeling of a youthquake.
Yeah.
Teenagers out painting murals, often with just that single word, now.
Oh.
Not someday, not after the transition, now. Now the country belongs to its people again. That was the feeling.
And then came those images, the ones broadcast around the world. Paul Biya, the Sphinx of Africa, the man who seemed untouchable for so long.
Yeah, powerful, deliberately crafted images. Him looking frail, hunched over, reportedly handcuffed, being escorted down the steps of the Atudi Palace he'd occupied for decades.
What details stood out in those images?
His signature dark sunglasses were gone. His expensive suit looked wrinkled, ill-fitting.
Yeah.
His face described as sunken. Pale, like the weight of those 50 years just finally crushed him.
And this wasn't a leaked photo op. This was intentional.
Very intentional. Broadcast by the Transitional Council. And their message was clear, according to analysts. This is not vengeance. This is history facing itself. Accountability made visible.
And Biya's status after that, where was he held?
Under secure house arrest, reportedly in a military hospital wing. Sources quoting aides still near him painted this picture of denial. Still asking for his French advisors, demanding his specific Geneva espresso, apparently refusing to watch the news or acknowledge the new reality.
Well, outside, his whole legacy was being dismantled.
Exactly. His palace, now a symbol of the past, those portraits that were everywhere, torn down by students who reportedly called him a ghost now, a ghost we're learning to live without.
There was lots of international speculation, right? Exile, a trial, some backroom deal.
Constantly. But the council's public position, reported consistently, was firm. No escape, no exile for crimes committed on our soil. They promised due process, emphasizing justice is not revenge, it's closure.
And that symbolic gesture with his car?
Yeah, his last official car, that bulletproof Mercedes, put on display in a museum exhibit explicitly titled The Cost of Silence. A very direct, very pointed message.
A message sent not just to Cameroonians, but across Africa.
Undeniably, people watched those images, read those reports, and understood. This wasn't just one man falling. It was the shattering of a myth.
Which myth?
The myth that power like that lasts forever.
Yeah.
That leaders like him are untouchable. That Africa inevitably bows to age and incumbency, not accountability. And while Biya sat isolated, the chants outside his former palace walls grew louder. Never again, no more kings. Cameroon has awakened.
So Biya's fall wasn't just a crack in one country's wall. It was more like a dam breaking across the continent.
That's precisely the sense you get from the sources looking at the wider reaction. The ripple effect was instant, tangible. Graffiti appearing overnight in places like Libreville, Gabon, asking, Cameroon did it, who's next?
Students marching in Lomé, Togo.
Silently, fists raised, holding signs. We are not afraid of our history anymore. And this viral video from Kinshasa, a mother telling her teenage son, what your grandfather dreamed of, you might live to see. Real, profound shifts in perspective.
It feels like more than just politics.
Like a spiritual rupture, one analyst called it. For decades, you had these towering figures, the Biyas, the Musevenis, the Nguemas, seemingly permanent fixtures. Presidents for life, almost.
And suddenly one falls. And the people were clearly part of it.
Which made everything feel possible again, especially for the younger generation. Pro-democracy youth movements felt a surge of energy across the continent. Hashtags started trending everywhere. Hashtag no more life presidents. Hashtag Africa as decides. Hashtag Biya's the beginning.
Even within established institutions like the African Union.
Reports noted a quiet shift even there in Addis Ababa. Delegates starting to speak more boldly in corridors, apparently, about term limits, about real transitions, about genuine sovereignty, less diplomatic caution.
And the diaspora reaction continued.
Oh, yeah. Young Africans dancing in the streets of London, Paris, New York, wearing the Cameroon flag like a new skin, as one report described it. And back in villages, elders gathered around crackling radios, listening intently as a new generation declared, we are not waiting anymore.
And fittingly, the new leadership in Cameroon called for a national day. Not of celebration, but reflection.
Yes, a very deliberate symbolic act. Not a military parade with tanks and flyovers, but a quiet moment, time for sunrise. Asking the entire nation to pause, remember the decades of silence, the fear, the stolen opportunities, and then consciously look forward.
There was a quote that seemed to capture this mood.
Africa is not broken. Africa was silenced. and now she's speaking. The fall of Biya, seen through that lens, wasn't just an endpoint. It was the sound of a continent waking up.
Which brings us right back to the core of what we've uncovered today, digging through these sources you shared. It's a story of, yes, quiet, surgical precision in the takeover, but fueled by these incredibly deep internal betrayals, driven by personal histories, and ultimately exposed by the sheer scale of corruption hidden in those palace archives.
And that stark contrast, wasn't it, between Biya's almost unbelievable detachment and the very real struggles of his people.
Exactly. And then the explosion of feeling from ordinary Cameroonians, the swift emergence of this young, seemingly representative government, and the undeniable geopolitical shockwaves hitting Paris and energizing places like Ouagadougou.
It really hammered home that this wasn't just about one man, however long he ruled. It was a moment that echoed across Africa, challenging fundamental assumptions about power, about sovereignty, about who gets to decide the future when a generation finally awakens.
So let's leave our listeners with this thought. You consider everything found in those palace archives, the secret deals, the offshore accounts, that jaw-dropping letter, and you hear that question now echoing across the continent. If this is what Biya hid, what are the others still hiding? How might similar reckonings, maybe driven by similar internal dynamics, maybe enabled by this new connected generation, reshape governance elsewhere in Africa? What does Paul Biya's Sunfall ultimately tell us about where real power lies when a nation, after decades of silence, finally decides it's not waiting anymore?